But like looking at it, I'm like, man, like I can like in principle I understand like what they're talking about. Like in practice, I don't know how the fuck you'd know when like shit's about to go down and what.
Well, it's gonna spike. It's gonna be like Volkswagen. It's gonna go. It's gonna probably hit up like it's gonna probably go like up like crazy as the. But now there's institutional whales on the long position, fighting the shorts. So those are the guys that are gonna have the trading capabilities to actually gobble up the shares and then exit at a high price. And it's gonna be all the institutional investors who have brokers. Discount brokers. Like it took me 2 days to put fucking the last 2 days. It took me 2 days to put cash into my fucking investment account because Questrade is so laggy these days because of all this market action. It's like, do you think I'm gonna have like be able to compete against institutional investors that built a straighter internet connection to the New York Stock Exchange because the current fucking internet connection was too far between Chicago and New York? They wanted it to be
to straighten it out
to get like a half a millisecond better latency.
Yeah, they literally dumped $10 million into that.
That's what Michael Burry was saying as well, is when he started exiting GameStop, he said it would take like the amount of time to get back the shares he loaned out like while he had GameStop shares was like measured better in weeks than days. It's just such a it's weird, like, and even like all of the clearinghouses potentially going insolvent just because it can't front collateral for GameStop purchases. It's like it's so weird how many of these things are like bottlenecked by like real world problems that like you don't think about when you're thinking of, like, stock trades.
So I guarantee you there's going to be lawsuits and a whole bunch of really salty fucking retail investors who are like bought in at 500 and tried to exit and couldn't exit, and then by the time they could exit, the share price
$2.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's kind of what I thought like would be like a worst case scenario if you're trying to get in now, is like
you're gonna
like you just something like doesn't execute, or like you don't execute something properly, or maybe you never even had the capacity to and you didn't realize your lack of capacity to execute it properly. And it just screws you.
Well, I think the amount of like action and volume, like even if you put like the proper limit orders and all that stuff to like try to automatically cash out, it's gonna the trading is gonna be so insane that things are gonna crash, things are gonna get halted.
Yeah,
the breakers are gonna go.
So many limiters.
And it's like you could get dumb shit unlucky, and you could literally be bag holding down to like nothing, and it's not because you didn't prepare, it's because you're using fucking like Questrade or Robinhood or some ghetto ass fucking discount brokerage that doesn't have the capability of keeping things running smoothly, whereas all the institutional investors, the hedge funds in the long position, they're not going to have those problems, idiots. Like they're going to fucking crush you.
Oh, well, that's another thing that I was like wondering, because I think I understood it as basically like the clearinghouses that were going to go insolvent were the ones servicing the retail investors. Like, I don't think, like, as I understood it, the clearinghouse is serving a hedge fund, or like, I don't know if hedge funds have their own clearinghouses or what, but like they wouldn't have a risk of going insolvent, so they could still purchase. So that was how the clearinghouses for the retail investors were still able to sell.
Well, and also, as far as I understood it, a little bit too, they wanted to limit the trade action. I think it was a little bit fishy that they limited.
Well, it's definitely one of those things where it's like there's a huge conflict of interest. Even if like you're supposed to have to do this, it's still way too suspicious.
The problem is that they restricted the ability to buy but not sell. That's where I think there's something
that makes sense, because everyone wants to buy, like everyone was saying buy. And it's pretty shitty if you lock someone in their position and they can't sell.
And as I'm saying, as I understand it, it's like they don't have the collateral issue when they're selling. Like,
exactly,
it's another clearinghouse that has to put up the collateral for the purchase from the clearinghouse that's selling.
It like the technicalities of it do seem to line up with what they did, but it's definitely like they should have tried to figure out some other way, because what they did was like super sketchy.
Well, the worst one is Robinhood, where they just basically like played it off in like the worst PR possible way, where it just made it look even more shady than it was.
Well, it's like,
yeah, but it's like, for our traders' own good, this volatile stock you aren't able to buy. It's like, no, it's because you don't have enough actual money to like deal with the collateral of your traders making this purchase.
Yeah, no, that's your own limitation that is screwed up.
The CEO said that in the future they were going to run out of liquidity, but they blocked trading before that happened, so they don't have a liquidity problem.
Yeah, of course. And they just had to block trading on another 50 stocks that also would have required collateral, because it was just they just had to do it so they wouldn't have a liquidity problem.
Exactly. All they had to do was cancel trading, and then as a brokerage, they didn't have liquidity problems. It's like, duh.
Like,
what can you not understand about their business model? They definitely are a big boy, and they can handle the liquidity. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like, but there's going to be a lot of retail investors that get absolutely rammed.
Oh yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to they're going to do the diamond hands. They're going to get caught bag holding because they're going to greed for more.
Man, diamond hands is like the best way of like putting a positive spin on bag holding I've ever heard. Like, man, diamond hands, it's like, so let me hand you this bag and you diamond hands it, okay?
You won't let go because your grip can't be broken.
Like, fuck. Because yeah, on 4chan it's like full of people just shitting on Redditors, and it's like I'd say like probably like 20-30% shills, and then like 70% people that are just like hate Reddit and are salty that they aren't on the GameStop at like 20 bucks or $100, but like they're just constantly saying that everyone at Reddit is going to be a bag holder, and that's like their big insult. And then on Reddit everyone's just talking about diamond hands and how they're never going to sell. I'm like, this is pretty much the same take.
Yeah, GameStop through 2030.
Yeah. Like, man, they're going to be holding on to GameStop when it becomes the biggest online games realtor, and then who's laughing then?
Exactly.
All right, well, we are live. We can...
That was a good segue.
Well, we can carry on for this forever. It's actually a fun topic, so... I want to talk about bag holding retards on Reddit for the rest of the night. So we're doing another episode of Hot Takes. Pretty self-explanatory. Who wants to kick it off?
I guess I'll just do my first one, because so my first one is basically that housing prices aren't that high and people just calm down. Like, because I don't know, that especially in Canada lately, and especially in our kind of generation, everyone's complaint is like, housing is just insane. It's totally like divorced from reality. It's so expensive, like pandemic, and goes up 20%, blah, 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 blah. And like, it obviously has gotten more expensive if you just look at the, sticker price or whatever you want to call it, the all-in cost of what the house, you're going to have to bid on the house. But a huge part of the story is just interest rates. So your actual monthly mortgage payments, if you inflation adjust and cost of living adjust, aren't substantially different than a lot of other eras in the past, like the 70s or 80s or 90s. Yes, there's some increases and certain areas have been hit harder, like, but a lot of the monthly costs are fairly comparable, just because, in the 80s you had interest rates running, mortgage rates in the 20% range, like teens to 20% mortgage. Now you have, in Canada, you can get under 2% more interest rates. It just has such a massive impact on your monthly payment. So it's not all about the total cost. And I have some other points, but I mean, that's like the major thing is like housing prices, if you actually do the math and look at it, aren't that bad.
I would be curious to know how close it is in a place like Vancouver or Toronto? Like, did you do any of those calculations?
People have done them for sure, and like you'd have to look by area and by locale. Like it massively varies, right? It's not, but like a huge percentage, like the studies I've seen, like a huge percentage of the variation is just interest rates. Like that explains like such a huge amount of the variance. Another thing to consider too, it's makes sense, but how average house sizes have like massively increased in
Oh yeah.
in the 1950. It was under 1,000 square feet was the average home size in the US.
That's tiny.
Yeah, exactly. It was under 1,000. It was like 900 and something square feet was average.
My apartment, which is a 1-bedroom, is getting pretty close to 900.
Well, I was going to get to that. Like in 2015, the average house size was 2,700 square feet in the US. So it tripled. So yes, the houses are more expensive, but they're also 3 times larger. And you
that's also like the average tripling, not the average of new ones sold, right?
That was just the average. I didn't look exactly what the details, but that was the average. And
so then you can assume the ones being sold are even bigger than average.
Yeah, probably. And also, I was also thinking like 1950s to 2015, probably gonna have a lot more things in a house, bundled in there. Washing machines, or not washing machines. Sorry, what are the dishwashers? Other more advanced things. It's not a ton, but it definitely does make a difference a lot of the time in terms of like quality of the house is better.
Bathroom fans.
Yeah, just like a ton of things that central heating and cooling in general in a lot of homes, right? So you have a lot of more things built into your home, and they're bigger. So that's also going to have a impact. And yeah, so I think like there's just a lot of it's almost like this holdover notion that a lot of people who grew up in like detached homes, myself being one, just kind of think like, oh yeah, you should just be able to go and buy a detached home as your first house, and that's all there is to it. But it's like, that's just not. I just don't think that should be like a societal expectation, especially for like the most desirable areas. It's like, Vancouver, Toronto, or New York. Like, why should you expect to be able to live in a 3,000 square foot house in your 20s?
I would also guess that even back in the day in the 1950s and 60s, even in a place like Vancouver, if you wanted to live downtown, there wouldn't be many options for a detached home, and if there was, you would not be one of them unless you were one of the wealthier people. I couldn't imagine that the heart of the city would be any proportionally any cheaper.
No, I think they really like exponentially started to blow up in the late 80s.
Maybe itself, but I would say like a lot of the major
Toronto, cities. A lot of like those locale specific examples though for say Vancouver and Toronto is just population growth, right? Like you have way more people living in there, and Canada runs on, we have a lot of immigration, and immigrants are usually economic immigrants who are skilled laborers, or they're skilled usually, or professionals, and they oftentimes also have money. Like that's another requirement of the Canadian immigration system. A lot of the time is they look at your wealth that you can bring to the country. So they're coming a lot of the time as established economic units, ready to buy supply in the high desirable areas. And they
almost all go to Toronto and Vancouver too.
Yeah, and I have sympathy for people that were born and raised in this Vancouver, Toronto, losing their, having to move out to the outskirts or even leave Vancouver or Toronto because they're not economically competitive, because they might not have a professional career or a 2 professional career households. They can't afford a downtown Vancouver condo or a detached home in like one of the nicer, closer to the pores. But like, to be honest, like tough shit. Like it's not that big of a hardship that you have to move from downtown Vancouver or you have to either rent or you have to move to a less desirable area. Like it's kind of frustrating, but it's not like the end of the world. Like that, you know, I think a lot of those same peoples would be the ones that would talk about like quote unquote gentrification as like boo-hoo, get over it. Like so
Yeah, they say that gentrification is just such a horrible thing, but yet.
Well, I know what I mean is like a lot of the people that complain about high housing prices and, you know, immigrants taking their jobs and all that kind of things would be the same ones that would look at people complaining about gentrification, which is a similar process, as like, oh, whatever, like get over it, like it's not a big deal. So it's like it's the same type of forces. It's supply and demand, and you can't look at one version where, you know, immigration increasing housing prices and say, oh, that's horrible, and then look at, you know, gentrification and say, well, that's fine. Like it's similar. It's a similar process and a similar outcome. And I think a lot of the time people are okay with one but not the other based on their politics or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, you might have to accept renting a smaller space if you want to stay in the most desirable areas if you're not a high income earner. And I don't think that's an unreasonable ask.
I also feel that a lot of people, they want to stay in a city to be near the action or something like that, and then they bitch and complain that they can't find the jobs that they want, or they can't have the affordable housing, and that's just the price that you pay for trying to be in the heart of the action, because you're competing against a ton of other people who are thinking the same way. Of course, it's going to drive up prices, and there's outsized competition for jobs. Like, no shit, that's just base exactly reality, right? That's not even something like, oh, that's a problem of the capitalist system. It's like that's just limited resources. That's just how that works. So
yeah, and that's, again, like that's what I'm saying is essentially is like, yes, you might have to move provinces. Say in Canada, you might have to move provinces if your expectation is being able to buy a detached home in your 20s. That's not really that big of a sacrifice in the grand scheme of things. You have to move provinces to get a detached home. You could have stayed and rented. It's not like you're forced out of your house, but you might have to have stayed and rented an apartment. But if you can't have it all. Like you can't. And I mean, the only people that can have it all, quote unquote, are the small sliver of people that are, you know, high income earners in their 20s, and that's a very, you know,
there's very few people like that.
Yeah, like don't pretend that that's the, you know, there's 30% or 40% of the population that meets that criteria. There's a few percent of the population that does, and you shouldn't look at them and, you know, decry that circumstances are so horrible that you can't join that few percent. That's all I'm saying. But it seems like an unpopular opinion. And again, I think a lot of it comes back to, another part of it comes back to people like looking at like the final house price and saying that's insane, like $2 million or $1 million. They don't look at the monthly cost and go, well, okay, well, that's, you know, a lot closer to what you would have had to pay, you know, for a house half that price at higher interest rates.
Well, when you mentioned the fact that interest rates were 20% back in the 80s, and yeah, that alone is just an extraordinary amount of interest to be paying, even on a small balance. That's going to cost you an awful lot. Just all you need to do is just run it out in an Excel or a calculator and just compare them. So even if it's, you know, 600,000 versus, you know, 75,000, but what interest rates are like 3% on a mortgage right now, you can get, at least what I was offered.
Oh, you can get a lot lower than 3%. Right now I'm just on, you can get 1.39%.
Oh yeah, right yeah, okay, there you go. Like you can get this incredibly low one.
So and just to give that a little bit of math for people, that for your monthly mortgage on an $800,000 mortgage would be $3,157. So yeah, that's not cheap, but you know, even if you're kind of like a median, or you know, like you don't have to be rich to afford that. You can be two middle income earners and afford that. You might be on a tight budget, but you could still afford an $800,000 mortgage, which is, you know, maybe $1 million home. So people don't understand that you can afford $1 million home if you are a couple that earns middle income. And I mean, just to show the interest rates, an 18% interest rate, your mortgage payment is now $11,731. So no one can afford that, right? So that's how interest rates work on long amortization periods. It gets insane.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
And the other point to note is, like, the lower the interest rate, the more impact that a further decrease in rate has on payment. So if you're at 5%, you go down to 4%, that's a bigger impact than going down from 10 to 9. So now we're already in a low interest environment. The further you cut it, the more impact that has already. And I mean, with that, I think that's a big part of what happened with COVID was create like a few more. We cut the interest rate even more to the bone, and housing prices jumped up unsurprisingly.
Yeah, they definitely. I think in Vancouver it jumped like 20% or something ridiculous.
But your monthly payments are probably not that much different pre-pandemic to post-pandemic if you look at the change in interest rate. So
one of the
again,
one of the things that you also want to remember when you're purchasing a home, you're going to have an opportunity cost. That money that could go into the house versus renting can be put into the market. So if you can get your interest, if your interest is really low, but you have a very large balance, well, that means that your actual your cash outflows for the month would they're a bit lower, and so you can actually use that and invest that difference. So essentially, all I'm saying is, like, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have really low interest rates and higher balances.
Yeah, and I mean, Japan is the most extreme. I think I've heard in Japan they've gone to like insane 100-year amortization periods in some occasions. Like, so it's not like at that point, your mortgage is basically rent.
Yeah.
Well, the wild thing in Japan too is like when we're talking about houses getting bigger in North America, I would put money that houses have gotten smaller by the decade in Japan. They live in just like tiny, huge high rises in their cities. Except in Kyoto, where I think they have like some height limit, which I might have to do with monsoons or might be aesthetic. But like Tokyo is just covered in residential skyscrapers.
Well, and they raise families in those, right? Like, I think that, again, that's like a holdover in... It's almost like a lot of the frustration and... I think there's just a bit of a misunderstanding about, like... Or expectations that are off. Like, a lot of kids in this generation, who are 20 to 30 years old, grew up in detached homes. They want a detached home. And they just, like... Fair enough, but at the same time, it's like... If you want to live in a high density city, it's just not going to be viable. And, you can raise a family in a 2-bedroom condo. It's not the end of the world. And a lot of the condos are as big as homes in the 1950s. So if you're some, hark back to the 1950s person, a lot of the time that you're going to have like a similar sized dwelling that they would have. I mean, the high rise situation might be different, but I mean, it's still going to be, the last 10 years or 20 years of huge homes have been the exception, not the rule.
Just be glad that you're not in the 1950s trying to put 4 or 5 kids per bedroom. True. Family sizes has also gone down. So if anything,
yeah, it's like a net gain in space.
A huge increase in space, and it's just not sustainable in high density areas. So I mean, I think we can wrap it up there, but I
got nothing else there, but I would agree with that.
About it, and like it deserves a deeper look. If you just see $1 million price tag, it actually does make some sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, especially since I'm actually going through that right now too. It's a good way to look at things. Price, what about you? What's yours?
I'll start with one that I'm not actually sure if it's a hot take or a lukewarm take, but basically, Mike Pence, a big beauty. So I think it's a hot take, but I don't
Yeah,
follow
it's a hot
American
take.
politics close enough to know for sure. So the reason I'd say is beauty is because you look at Mike Pence. He's just ultra religious, conservative guy, like straight shooter as far as anything I know about him. Actually does what he believes to be right, and I think just his association with Donald Trump kind of dragged him into the mud in a lot of people's view, because they think, like, why would somebody who's upstanding and religious work with somebody as valueless and like morally corrupt as Donald Trump? And I think what isn't taken into consideration there is that somebody like Mike Pence seems like the type of guy that believes in the idea of like a greater good. Like, he's going to sacrifice or work towards what he sees as like the best outcome, even if it means having to deal with characters that aren't of the same moral fiber, and like put up with them and talk them down out of crazy things that they might want to do, and somehow always manage to stay friends until the very end, where his good old Donald Trump throws you under the bus because he wants to do something that's not even possible, and you don't even entertain the idea of it being possible, and then you don't talk for the last however many days of the presidency, although you're in charge of taking over most of the transition and allowing Biden to get into the White House in the usual manner that would be done by Donald Trump. But he wasn't quite as involved, according to the news. So I think he gets too much flack if he gets flack, and I think even if he doesn't get flack, like, people don't consider somebody working with a bad person to potentially be still a good person.
Well, I would agree that it is a hot take because he seemed to be kind of like disliked, obviously on the left because he's religious, and that's kind of just a non-starter for like most of the left, especially like say the progressive left. He's religious and strongly so he's just dead to them. And then he was like relatively liked by Trumpers until the last few weeks. Now he's like,
number one enemy.
Pence,
kill the traitors first.
Yeah, he's first against the wall if Trump ever gets power again. So definitely a hot take to say that he's that you think he's half decent. I would agree. Like, I think it is yeah, like you don't hear anything about, like, I don't know him, like I don't know much about him, but it does seem like he was fairly consistently sane, and he also like put up with a lot, obviously working with Trump, and so many other people just tapped out when dealing with Trump, like just couldn't maintain a proper relationship with him and just either quit or got fired. And Pence managed to ride it out for the 4 years, and apparently seems like he didn't do anything stupid or make anything worse, and in fact probably was a steady hand throughout. So I would say he deserves some credit for that, for sure.
Yeah, I think that, like, would to put it like succinctly, what I'm kind of thinking about is that a lot of people who like quit the Trump administration because it had problems are somewhat applauded as like, oh, that's such a good thing to do, like, get out of there, like, it's just a mess. And I think like it actually is the more difficult choice is to stay with all the problems, see all the problems, and still be working like every day to do your best to mitigate them.
And not get completely sucked up and corrupted by it. I don't know enough about his actual policies or anything like that, but he never struck me as a person who was actively out pushing stuff that really was horribly toxic.
The only like consistent criticism I've heard of him was that he was in favor of gay conversion therapy at some point. I don't know if he still is, but that was the like smear that was always used against him.
What I've heard was that he was against making conversion therapy illegal or something along those lines. But seeing the way that the bill in Canada was passed that quote unquote made conversion therapy illegal was just so mangled, and probably steps on the ability of psychiatrists and psychologists to properly do their job to help people who have mental health problems. Like, I don't know. I would have to deep dive it to know if that is a strong sticking point, because there's a lot of times where they try to add bills under like some innocuous thing, like, oh, this is going to ban conversion therapy.
Yeah, and it's some sort of bullshit omnibus thing that contains all sorts of added stuff, or
well, like, if you're a psychologist, you're not allowed to help people deal with questions about their sexuality unless you affirm their non-heterosexuality. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, what if they're just heterosexual the whole time? And then,
well, who's even heterosexual in 2021? I mean, that's
true. Like, there's pretty much none left.
That's a red flag for mental illness, to be honest. If
well,
you're heterosexual.
One of the things, because I went and looked at that bill that they passed in Canada, and I could definitely see, if you were a psychologist or psychiatrist here, I wouldn't touch any sort of sexuality issues with a 10-foot pole. It's like, nope, don't do that. Sorry, don't do it. I can't help you.
Yeah, it's very dangerous.
Yeah,
but,
well, you can go to jail over it now.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't
have, they have sex, and you just be like, "Yeah, sorry, I'm a virgin. You're gonna have to go to someone else." I'm saving myself for death.
Yeah, I could definitely see Pence's vote on that making sense if it was something like that. I don't know the actual specifics.
Well, I just brought it up because that's like the only like criticism that I've like ever heard about Pence, that more than like once, like people. So I've never really looked into his position or what his exact, but I always hear people say, well, implying he's in favor of conversion therapy.
Yeah, some sort of gay hater.
Mike shock the gays Pence.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I hear. I think he's in like he had like a similar thing to Fauci, and Fauci only had to do it for like 9 months or 8 months, and I think Fauci was ready to walk off a fucking bridge.
Oh yeah, like Fauci did. Like I don't agree with like a lot of like how Fauci handled things, but the fact he stuck it in there is very admirable, because that was just some crazy shit he had to put up with.
I give him a lot of slack just for the fact that he had to toe so many, like he had to like walk the tightrope so hard because he was getting undermined at every opportunity, and you're
dealing with a literal Sam Harris
megalomaniac.
Yeah,
I think
orange goblin who's constantly attacking you after you walk off the stage.
Yeah, so
like sometimes it would be like right in front of Fauci. Like he'd leave the stage and then Trump would go up and say something that contradicts him. And it's like, man, like, come on.
That must have been a nightmare. I really agree with your hot take here, Price.
Well, I would agree with it just also on the fact that Pence brought in has popularized his never go into a room without his wife. With a woman strategy, and it's like that's a big brain strategy that deserves some attention. Like, so good for him.
Abba and Preach talk about that too, and I was like, that's a pretty.
That's another thing he actually gets criticized for on the left. But I think
it's being devoted to his wife and bringing her with him into any room with another woman.
Just his reluctance to get accused of anything improper, it apparently is a sign of his
big red flag.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
What's he trying to hide here?
Well, I mean, no, thankfully there's been no accusations. That's borne out his caution to be prudent. It's just been smooth sailing for everyone. So he seems like a delusional nut. But yeah, that I think that's a funny strategy.
It's a pretty solid one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that about wraps it up. Like, it wasn't the hottest take, but adding Fauci in there is something that I would agree with, because he deserves a lot of respect for toughing it out, not making like a public spectacle of himself, like disagreeing with Trump.
And just think about how much time he had to actually like spend listening to Trump. Like,
oh yeah. Or spend trying to explain things to Trump that you know he's going to talk about, like, off the cuff, and like you're really trying to get it down with him so he like gets it, and then he still like word salads it.
Exactly, like he has
inject
to
that bleach
to Trump talk about his specialty for like hours a day. Like that's just a tragedy. Like I would just go and not like offend Trump either. Like he has to listen to just medical diarrhea. Knowledge diarrhea coming out of Trump's mouth 24/7 and not correct him offensively ever to avoid getting fired. Like has like the patience of a goddamn saint.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up, unless you guys got a little bit more.
Yeah, that's good.
I think.
All right. So my first one is about long-term relationships. So something that I'd noticed is a lot of people nowadays are either not getting married or taking a long time to get married. So the average period of time to date before you get married is 5 years now. That's the average, and then but it used to be 2 and a bit. And a lot of the time people quote, "Oh, the major issue is I'm not ready financially, or my partner isn't ready financially. It's too expensive," that type of thing. And my hot take is, well, that part of that definitely could be true. I think a lot of it is actually driven by the fact that they're scared of taking on the responsibility of getting married. It's way more comfortable and easy to just carry on doing the same thing that you were doing. You don't have to plan a wedding. You don't have to spend the money, and don't have to take on the responsibility of it. I think I've noticed that with a lot of people around me. They'll date for years and years, and I'm like, well, I'm not quite financially ready. It's like, you're lawyers. It's like, what are you talking about?
You hate to see it.
Yeah, and I think there's quite a few people who now say, I think it's up to 50% of young people say you don't need to get married to have a good relationship, and all the data suggests like that is not true. Like the rates of dissolution for unions if you are not married are way higher. There's just so much more.
Well, I would push back a little bit in the sense like, yes, that there is a lot of like correlational information, but it seems like a big part of the problem is like selection bias, right? Like,
yeah, no kidding. If you don't want to marry someone that you've been with for 5 years, like there probably are some red flags there that might lead to you breaking up in the future. Like,
or it just might be the type of personality that's just not as like committed. Like you're just not the person that likes to commit. You type of person that doesn't like to commit would probably not get married because they don't want to commit. So they never form a marriage. So there's so many problems looking at the
thing I'm not sure about that I've been wondering about. Like, I never even realized that 5 years was becoming commonplace. It seems very high to me, which makes me even more curious about this, is that a lot of people don't seem to really take the fact that they're in a common law union seriously, or like is this just like
that's
difficult to legislate, or do breakups from a common law union like end up in a similar way to divorce, or do they actually just usually just get ignored or like not taken to court?
Both. I would say they can end up much
like I know they can because you're legally in the same sort of position as a marriage, but I feel like they most often wouldn't.
There is differences, but a lot of people like don't even realize that common law does have the similar implications to a marriage. And they definitely don't like they treat it like they're dating, right? And they literally just break up. I remember I had a acquaintance that I worked with who broke up with his long-term girlfriend, and they were common law, and he didn't even know they were common law until they broke up, and then it became an issue because they had bought a truck together. And then that, like, the equity in the truck became, like, divided, and, like, it was just a huge pain in the ass. But he was basically, like, dumbfounded that, like, would come into play, and frustrated about it, and didn't even realize that would have been a thing, and now he's having to deal with it. And I was just like, yeah, makes sense. Like, it's Before I was in a relationship, I didn't really think about common law at all. Like, it wasn't a term I'd heard or a thing that anyone talked about.
That's one of the reasons that I feel like it is why I think it's the hot take, right? I think a lot of people, they view it in such an unserious manner, and a lot of the time they say, well, because all of the research that I'd seen, people had kept saying, well, no, it's money, it's this, it's that, but I really think it's just like you get comfortable and then you don't bother you won't even take it seriously to the point where you would look into something like that. So,
well, I'd agree that it's not just money, but I think there is something there in the sense, like, wealthy people still get married at pretty much almost equivalent rates.
Yeah, but I think that's driven more due to like a difference in, I think the general
be socioeconomic rather than solely economic.
Exactly. It's the reason that they have money in the first place.
Well, I think there maybe is something to that, but I also think, like, a lot of the original reason for marriage was economic in a certain sense, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those reasons don't exist nearly as much. Like, a division of labor is not really as much of a thing anymore, which is a big part of marriage. Was like you got married for children, and a lot of the labor was kind of division of labor. Men had their certain jobs that they were good at, breadwinner, certain other things. Women had their thing, a lot of the child rearing and the household work. And now people are having kids less, so there's less motivation because you just a lot less people having kids and less kids. And then also, like, a lot of like the division of labor stuff just doesn't hold true. Like, men and women participate in the market, like for labor market, to get paid at somewhat comparable rates. Like, men do work more, but not that much more. And a lot of like the kind of like housework, child rearing stuff is now, it's like, it's not as important because we have washing machines and dishwashers. Like, people like listening don't think about that, but like, I can't remember the exact stat, but it was like a non-insignificant portion of people's time before washing machines was doing laundry every week. It was like,
this was so rough.
It was like 6 or 7 hours a week devoted to cleaning your clothes, and now it's down to like probably 1.
Well, and cooking as well, like always over like a relative, like you didn't have like a microwave was a huge deal because it could cook food fast, or like a good oven. Like, you're just like cooking with terrible situations and often cooking like ornate meals and such because you didn't just go out and eat unless you were quite wealthy.
Yeah, and even like washing machines, proper sinks, dishwashers, dishwashers, not washing machines, all those kind of things. Yeah, just like housework, the amount of housework that you have to do has just gone down a lot, and
it's still too much.
And even if we go back, like, what our great-great-grandparents, like, they had to pickle and preserve food for the winter. Like, it just had to be done.
Or, farm labor.
Yeah.
Living on a farm, there was just essentially an unlimited amount of, like, little tasks that you could or should be doing to, keep everything running.
So you starve during the winter?
So I think there's something in just, like... I do think there is something in your hot take of like a lack of, what would you call it? Like a lack of willingness to take on commitment and responsibility. But I think there's other.
Yeah, I would say that it's not solely due to that. But what I had noticed is they said that was money was the only reason. And then I looked up the average cost of a wedding in the States, and it's $30,000 to $40,000. The median's $20,000, but that's what it is. And to me, that kind of pointed. Obviously, I don't have the exact causal data or anything like that. But the hot take here for me is you don't have to be spending that amount of money on a wedding to have something that's memorable. And there's no reason for that to be the excuse not to do it. So for a chunk of the people who are not getting married, who say that it's for financial reasons and whatnot, I think that that's just a cover story for them. And I think it's not even a conscious one. But I think for a good chunk of the people, it's still, there are some legitimate financial concerns and whatnot. If you're living pretty close to the edge, and even a $6,000 wedding, maybe that's an expense you just can't afford. But I would say the general idea is there's more than that's going on than just that. Those basic replies. But that's all I have on that one.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic. Marriage and long-term relationships are very, a lot of change has happened to them, and they're very important. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Future topic for a podcast.
Well, especially common law, I'd be interested in learning more about how that compares to actual marriage for things like taxes and such as well.
You're supposed to file common law in the CRA if you're together for a bit. They'll just start doing it for you.
Yeah.
It also, I can speak to the tax part, is you're pretty much treated the same as married.
So I feel like from a practical standpoint, for all intents and purposes, the marriage is more of a celebration of these two people being together. But this day and age, pretty much married after your common law, for all intents and purposes of the real world.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, it's replaced it.
Yeah. Well, do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'll do my last one or second one. It's kind of short, but I think letters of references in general, but especially letters of reference, are trash. That's the only way to say it. They're a waste of time. Everyone involves time, and they're useless. And in fact, actually probably worse than useless. And we should find some way to collectively ditch them as soon as humanly possible for everything. And that's about all there is to it.
Why would you say that?
I definitely see where you're coming from on worse than useless, I think, because it obviously incentivizes a sort of old boys club, nepotism aspect of business.
Or just being a lying piece of shit. Or just being the kind of I don't know, socially manipulative or socially kind of just, I don't know if what the term is, but I remember because I was considering graduate school, and you need letters of reference. And so I was okay, where would I get a letter of reference for graduate school? And all the recommendations is professors. And I was okay, well, I didn't spend a ton of time in office hours. I didn't, do much of that. So I don't really I wasn't close with any professors. I, spent time with some of them. And so I kind of asked around at what people did to get letters of reference. And someone's suggestion was just mass email every professor you've had, just go find their names. And maybe if you have it, attach a piece of work you did for their class and remind them of the grade you got. And that's what I did. And I got enough responses to get my letters of reference.
Yeah.
And I was
I'm lucky enough to have a relationship with my profs because I went to a small school. So I actually had a couple that I knew well enough that they told me they'd give me a letter of reference. The one guy I knew him well, and he said if you get an A in my class, I'll give you a letter of reference. But if you don't get an A, even though I know you, can't do anything for you.
Yeah, and so that's respectable to a certain extent, but it's man, that's just so trash that you would just email everyone you know, or every professor you've had. A couple of them will respond because they might feel bad, or they might just have a boilerplate letter of reference to get ready to go, and they just feel in a giving mood and give it to you. And it's just what a useless system. It just does not it doesn't tell you anything if you're if you're willing to be like shameless, essentially, if you just want to be shameless, you just go around and ask whoever you want. You're eventually going to get it. Or some people will just literally fake letters of reference all the time. I'm sure.
Yeah, I know people at a major school who would do that.
And it's like,
kids
okay,
at the school, kids at that school, like this is a top 20 university in the world, in the business program. It was just you can even create like a shell company and say that you were the CEO or whatever, and they would do that to give letters of reference for each other. Like that was like a scam that they would run, and they just like they built a company to do this because it only costs like a couple $100.
Well, and I'm sure it already exists in like less organized form where you can already buy letters of reference. I'm sure that's already a thing, or even references. I'm sure you can buy it. Like I'm sure people sell it online in like forums and stuff where you just like say I need a letter of reference, answer my call. So that's probably already a thing. But I'm just waiting for like an app where you can just
reference.me.
Yeah, exactly. You put in.
Oh man, we're building this. Okay, screw the podcast. We got a new thing to do.
What title that you want it to come from, like a doctor of medicine, a doctor, a professor of whatever. You just type in the title. You type in the field, whatever. Like you pick your parameters, and then like how glowing is it? What skills do you need referenced? And you spend $100, and then they send you a letter of reference. And then if you need to go like deeper, you can get the premium package, which includes a fake profile for that person on LinkedIn or whatever.
I guarantee you this already exists.
Shell accounts like, oh, I'm a professor at Columbia. Like, there's no fact checking on fucking LinkedIn. Like, you could just literally say you're a professor of at Columbia, put in all this shit, and make a shell person that writes letter of references, and it's like, people are gonna get jobs off that, and it's just like, it's just what a like exercise in futility in terms of like for the people getting the letters of reference, for the people writing them, and for the companies requesting them. Like, it's just so
gameable.
One thing I find weird, like on the topic of references, is like work references. I've been a few people's like work reference. I've never gotten a call over these people getting their jobs or not, and like usually they get the job they apply for. It's like, do people even call references that are listed on a resume?
Yeah, the higher up you go in the food chain, the more common it is. Like I know for some of the job processes I've been involved in, they called and did like a 45 or not a 40. I think it was a half an hour or something, like a long fucking phone conversation with my references. And the funny thing about that is,
be harder to fake that then, though.
True, unless you just get someone to pretend to be your supervisor. Like your friend could go to bat for you and pretend to be your reference and have a half an hour phone call. It's not that big of a deal. I filled out for a buddy of mine. He was trying to get a job in banking, and you needed to do like a 20-minute survey online, and he just sent me the link. I was like, yeah, I was definitely supervised this guy at his internship for sure. And he got that job, no problem. And I know his other reference for that was also in our grade, and so we're just all buddies and got a job in banking out of it. So I just don't understand like what the point of having them is. It just seems like such a relic of a bygone era, and the only like reasonable references I can think of is like previous supervisor references. And even those are like can be like those are like the only ones that have like a small thread of justification, and even that, like a lot of the time, if you get like shit canned for being a trash employee, they'll request your resignation, and one of the conditions will be they'll give you a glowing reference. So you can resign from your position, and they won't have to pay you severance, and you get a great recommendation in exchange. Like, it's just
seems
like
legit.
Such a move.
Yeah, it's just shit like that. It means like, I don't know.
And then they hire someone to fill your spot who had a glowing recommendation, and then, oh man, they got us. He didn't deserve that glowing recommendation. They just didn't want to pay him severance.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't see how helps
It's
anyone.
like a lose-lose.
Exactly, and people spend a lot of like time and effort in it, and there's also a certain segment of the population that I think is not like willing to be dishonest or like game the system, that just like gets hardcore screwed.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
they're-
because this is something that if you do game, there's pretty low chance of getting caught if you do it right, and there's huge upside. So it has extreme incentives to do it. And well,
Yeah,
it's like
unless
talking
you're in, like,
about.
some tiny industry, like who cares if you get caught once and you don't get the job? Like, CIBC or what, you're trying to get a job in banking and CIBC tells you to shove it because you gave them a fake reference. RBC is not going to call CIBC for like some low level job unless you're like a CEO or some shit where you're like, everyone knows who you are, you're famous. Like, no one's going to actually check if you lied about these things to a previous potential employer. Like,
Yeah.
there's just no downside. And then there's just like a group of upstanding people that will never like do it, and then and those are the type of people you probably want working for you, ironically. Like the people that won't lie about
The actual upstanding, honest people, because they're not going to fuck you over. I would say that's true. I'd even add on that in the industry that I work, networking is this huge thing as well, and it's much the same. I think it should just be dismantled for the most part with something else to replace it, because it's all about how well you can speak in the moment, and you're going to get a whole bunch of smooth talkers who get through because the people like them, and then they turn out to be complete dumpster fires. And this, you hear about this all the time in these industries where it's
I was just going to add to your point that it's not even like speaking well in the moment, but you mentioned it. It's like it's just being likable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was going to add that. Like, if you're just doing a phone interview, I feel like people would have more trouble. But like being just like a personal, likable person, you don't have to even talk that well. You just have to like have a smile, like upbeat sort of attitude during the initial meeting, and like you're pretty well off. Make some eye contact here and there.
You just have to have like a minor amount of charisma, and you're basically in the door, even if you have like a complete trash qualifications. Like, yeah, and you don't have to like answer any technical questions well or speak well on the spot. You can just be kind of like make some jokes, be funny, be fun, be likable, be whatever, and that you're gonna get the job.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually see that quite a bit. There's always people who get through, and you gotta wonder, maybe the reason you're here is not your grades or your skills in your previous roles. Everybody seems to like you, but then you fuck all the work up on the files. So,
I mean, I think hiring in totality needs to be revamped for sure. Like,
I definitely.
network, but like the first thing to go should be reference letters and references.
Interviews.
Just kill them, please.
I get what they're trying to do. I understand why people are doing
Well,
it,
it's
but
definitely
it's just not a good solution to
an aspect of a bygone era for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be like, how else are you gonna know things about people very effectively? Like in the 1800s, like what are you really gonna do?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
Standardized testing or anything like that.
In the 1800s, you could also make a much better argument that letters of reference, or in the 1900s, like before email and stuff like that, letters of references would mean more because it meant that you face to face talk to your professor or talk to your previous employer with some foresight, got the letter of recommendation, got the letter of reference, kept it with you, and provided it to your employers, right? Like it was like something you added to your portfolio.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just done when you needed it in like this gameable, like, kind of pointless way. Like, yeah, just being able to go and mass email everyone that you've worked for or had a class with or whatever, or your friends providing you a reference. Like it would have been actually probably a lot more meaningful to have something equivalent to like a portfolio with those in it. Now it's just like it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, do we have anything else on this one?
I think that's about it. I think just get rid of them.
All right, Price, what do you got?
So this one's kind of an esoteric hot take. It's basically the terminology of neurotypical is something that bugs me. It's often used to like juxtapose with people who are autistic. Like it's either autistic or neurotypical, and it's often given as like a just flat sort of value. And to emphasize why I think it's kind of ridiculous, I'll just list off like what a neurotypical would be is someone who's a perfect grasp of language. They don't screw up ever in using language, because screwing up using language is on the autism side. So this is not screwing up is neurotypical. Full understanding of social norms. They never do social faux pas, because that's autistic. So no social faux pas. Perfectly understand the perspective of others and how they're viewing the situation, because if you screw that up, not a good sign. They definitely don't have any problem understanding or communicating their own emotions. Definitely a big yikes right there if you have those problems. They have a wide range of interests, take change easily, and they're very adaptable, and they have an expansive imagination.
Is this an actual definition?
No, this is I just inverse the autism traits. It's just to give like the like, because an autistic person would have lots of trouble with these, and like the perfect neurotypical person would have no trouble with these. And it's like, man, like the perfect neurotypical person or like would be as rare as the perfect autistic person. Like a person with all of these autistic traits would be as rare as a person with none of them.
So to clarify, your argument is neurotypical people don't exist. Change your mind.
No, I'm just saying neurotypical people are not actually typical, despite what the name might imply. They are themselves very rare.
Yeah, I agree. Like autism is one of those tricky ones where it's essentially like obviously, well, I haven't kept up on the research, but it's a spectrum, right? As far as I still consider it a spectrum, and it's has like diverse symptoms, right, or diverse presentations. So it's one of those things where it's like it touches a lot of things, and you can like be from one end of the spectrum to the other, and you know what constitutes autistic versus neurotypical seems very squishy in terms of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's basically kind of what I'm getting at is just like I'd say the vast majority of people have autistic traits. It's just you don't have enough autistic traits, or you don't have the autistic traits bad enough that you would be classified or diagnosed as autistic or on the spectrum. But it's just this like myth in like when you get into the people talking about autism, like they always like, oh, those neurotypicals have it so easy, and it's like, man, if you think that the average person is like I described, like, man, that's like such a negative worldview to have, where like everyone else just has none of these problems that autistic people have. It's like, it's just they don't have like all of them, or they don't have as many of them. But I think like a lot of these problems are relatively general.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think that's a manifestation of like the victim culture, right? Like, oh, I'm autistic, which means I have all these struggles that are unique to me and the autistic community. And it's like, yeah, I agree. Like, you know, there's tons of people that wouldn't be diagnosed as autistic that have trouble understanding social situations. Like, it's not.
What I love the most is trouble understanding your own emotions and communicating them. I'm like, man, that's got to be like 99% of people. Like, you got to get more specific than that.
So few people would actually be good at that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think that's a good point. Like, again, it does seem kind of to fall in line with like the victim mentality of like you have to make the argument that you have it so much worse than everyone else. That's how you get ahead these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's like, obviously, if you think of the worst case scenario, autism, where it's also coupled with, what's the DSM-5 term? cognitive impairment, then it's like it kind of sounds silly to be talking about like people trying to have a victimhood mentality when like they can't function in a daily life. But like the high functioning, well, they don't have it anymore, but high functioning is how they used to describe it, or Asperger's, but now it's all wrapped into autism spectrum. Like, yeah, those people often write in such a way that you're just like, man, you know, people aren't diagnosed also have many of these problems.
Well, and based on, I think, 100%, like, I think there is, like, say, severe autism, especially with cognitive impairment, where it's just obvious that those people are not neurotypical and just cannot, you know, they don't face the same landscape that everyone else does. But I agree, autism has been one of those disorders where a lot of glommers on have kind of decided that they have autism, or
it's like ADD or ADHD, right?
Yeah, and then you know, their whole, it becomes, it's another part of their identity, right? And it becomes this, like, you know, crux and this excuse of like, oh, like, you know, I don't have, you know, like, relationships are uniquely hard for me because I'm autistic, and, you know, there's nothing I can do about it, or it's, you know, so much harder. It's like no one else has it this hard. It's like, no, lots of people have problems with relationships and problems in that area of life or this area of life. So I do think that's a good point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. A lot of people do want to see it as a better way of putting it, I think, is that it is a popular opinion to say, oh, well, things are so difficult for me, and it's because I fall on the spectrum. Well, no, everybody has problems, and a lot of them are going to be social ones. People make mistakes all the time. I don't know anybody who doesn't have some sort of social faux pas at some point. So,
well, it's the same as, I think, a lot of mental health disorders have been.
They've been gamified, I think, or gamed.
A little bit, like they're. I think in people's rush to destigmatize mental health or whatever, there's also like this kind of like, it gives a bit of protection for people who want to use mental health disorders as a crux or a crutch or a justification for their lack of effort into changing themselves, or lack of effort into doing everyday normal things that are hard but like are important for building relationships or getting your life together. Like, you know, the reason I don't do dishes is because I have depression, or the reason I don't shower is because I'm a manic depressive. It's like, no, you've just kind of glommed onto that as an excuse to justify your behavior, and you're not really doing much else to improve. You're not doing anything to really adjust or treat your depression, apparently, and you're kind of like just stuck in this mode of being, and you don't have any of the other really symptoms that much, or you're self-diagnosed. Like, that's the other thing. Like,
yeah, I think that's like, that actually touches on like what the core of what I was thinking of but couldn't quite articulate is basically this sort of like emerging dichotomous way of thinking that either you're what I described as a neurotypical, but like apply that to every mental illness, or you have the mental illness. Like, if you're not waking up in the morning, smile on your face, like happy to meet the day, you're depressed. Like, I'm sorry, if you're not accomplishing every task you set for yourself, yeah, it's probably depression. If you're not just looking forward to your life, that's probably anxiety. Like, there's such a like black and white kind of attitude towards just interpreting these sort of actual mental illnesses, but by laymen, that is bizarre. And I think that's kind of how like the depression one definitely is the one. Depression and anxiety you see all the time, where people will just use it as a way to describe themselves without any sort of diagnoses. And then the autism one, I feel like, is going that way, where like people are just like self-diagnosing themselves as like autism, and then like writing off like bad or troublesome behaviors as like, oh, nothing can be done,
or justifying, a slew of special treatment in their life, right? Like, oh, I'm autistic, therefore at the workplace I shouldn't have to attend meetings or whatever.
Oh, the one that gets me the most
exactly.
is people and their noise sensitivity. It's like, you just heard a rifle go off beside you and you didn't have earmuffs on. That's not noise sensitivity. That just hurt. Like, everyone hates that. Like, what? Like everyone these days has to have some sort of like special sensitivity to stimulus. It's like, no, it's uncomfortable, and everyone else feels uncomfortable in the same situation.
Yeah, when the 300 Win Mag goes off beside your ear, you're all gonna be bleeding and having ringing in your ear for days. Like, it's not something that anybody can tolerate.
Oh, I don't like going to clubs because they're way too loud, and I'm noise sensitive. It's like, or you could say, I just don't like going to clubs because they're way too loud. That's probably more accurate.
I think that the translation to that is, I don't like going to clubs because my hearing isn't permanently damaged to the point that the noise doesn't bother me. Because everyone that goes to clubs and doesn't get offended by the noise probably just has permanent hearing damage.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like, if I tell someone like, oh, this is too loud for me, or whatever, they'll be like, oh, I didn't know you're like noise sensitive. It's like, I'm not fucking noise sensitive. Like, you're playing this at way too loud of a volume.
It's like there's blood coming out of my ears. It's like when you get punched in the face, say, oh, I'm kinetic energy sensitive.
Yeah.
I'm sensitive.
Oh, sorry, man. I didn't know you're so sensitive to kinetic energy. Like, I would have punched you in the face otherwise.
I don't know. There's a lot of that problems with the move to more like destigmatized mental illness. I do feel like,
it's people taking on the label so that they can get themselves some sympathy. I think there's definitely some benefit to removing the stigma for certain things, but again, like we were talking about in some of the other hot takes, a lot of it is just then gamified or gamed, right? Like with the reference letters. So there has to be a proper balance. And I don't think.
Oh no, yeah, it's a hot take. Like, I'm not suggesting maybe this is the best way that things can be destigmatized, is to convince everyone they're mentally unwell. It's like, I mean, there are definitely psychologists who would be on board with that. Like, oh yeah, you've got to go to your psychoanalyst once a month if you just want to be like a healthy, normal, functional human being, because I mean, otherwise you're just gonna descend into depravity.
To be fair, that's going to be like the only profession left in like 5 years. So everything else is
only going to AI psychologists in 5 years. Like, they're going to be so good.
Hey Google, fix my depression.
Man, I'm down for it. All right, is there anything else, or has everybody got what they wanted to say out for that one?
I think that's about it.
All right.
I think.
Okay, so I can do my last one, and a little bit more of a lighter topic, but my hot take is smoking's actually pretty cool. A lot of people say it's not, but they don't know what they're fucking talking about. And to actually explain it, I think a lot of people, they like to say smoking is not cool at all, bro. It's disgusting. Like, you're a disgusting person if you smoke. It's not cool. And my response to that is like, nah, it's still pretty cool. It's not something you should be doing because it's very unhealthy for you, but there is something inherently cool about it.
Yeah, when did health and coolness ever go hand in hand?
Yeah, exactly. Driving a motorcycle at 200 kilometers an hour down the road is pretty fucking cool. Doesn't mean it's healthy. It's still cool.
Flying a fighter jet, pretty cool. Doesn't mean it's healthy.
Yeah, get blown out of the sky after. You look fucking cool doing it.
But I think smoking is like one of those things that is like, it's not situationally independent. Like it's dependent on like who you are and your situation, whether it either augments your coolness or enforces your loser status, essentially.
If you're
Like,
It's just a multiplier.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
It's a multiplier. You're either the fat slob crushing 2 packs of Next or 7 Reds in the alleyway, or you're the suave Wolf of Wall Street. I actually don't know if he smoked. I can't remember, but
He must have. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, he did every other drug in the world.
what's a little nicotine? Oh, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. Oh man,
yeah,
that's
like,
my other favorite thing about smoking is when people, like, I know people like this, they'll go party their heads off for 2 weeks straight and they're like, I don't smoke, like, that's gross, keep it out of me. It's like, what? Like,
Oh,
you just did 2 weeks straight of cocaine. What are you talking about?
That
What
was the
are you
funny-
talking about? Or they're
That was-
they're vegan and they're like, I don't eat like meat, that's horrible for you. It's really like it's really unclean. Or they're vegetarian usually. I know a couple of people like this. It's like, I know that you went to a music festival and did Molly 5 days in a row and probably slept 3 hours. You're like, I don't know. Like, you judging your other friends for smoking is very stupid. Like, come on.
that was
man.
also a funny like parallel with the vaccines. Those actually some of the funny memes I saw were like, you know, you're willing to go like snort a baggie of God knows what off some dude's dick in the bathroom at some sketchy festival, but you won't take a vaccine.
Don't at me,
Yeah, I
bro.
saw that one too.
So like, oh no, vaccines, you don't know
That's
what's in those.
unnatural.
You don't know what's in that shit, bro. Like it's dangerous. And then it's like, well, you just do drugs in bathrooms that you have no idea where they came from or what's in them, and you don't give a shit. Like, I think you can survive the vaccine. Yeah, I really do think like smoking is like dichotomous in that way. Is like I like lots of people that smoke, it just makes them look like complete losers,
Yeah,
and
the guy
forces that.
But if you have, there's so many cool movie scenes that are really accented by the smoking in it. It just, you really do lose something if you take out the smoking. And
I think a lot of times now they use herbal cigarettes for actors and actresses who don't smoke
yeah, I would imagine that the
because
actors
it
don't.
is necessary for certain time periods.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it depending on the person, it can actually really enhance the cool factor.
yeah. There's a couple scenes. There's some great, like some of the gangster scenes in some movies, and some television show. Mindhunter was really good. They really effectively used that in that show. At least the first season, it was, you know, it really would have detracted otherwise. So, like, to remove it, even, I think you would have lost a lot in some of the scenes.
I once watched a show, like a TV show, where the main character was constantly smoking. It was like a huge aspect of his character trait. I've never just been so tempted to take up smoking. Like, man, that's just so cool.
Yeah,
It's just crazy. It's such a weird like impulse. It's, you almost don't think it's like as persuasive, like the media, as you are told it is, until you see something like that and you're like, man, I wish I was more like that character. I should start smoking.
It is really persuasive, but it's also, I just find it very hypocritical when people say they're like, there's nothing cool about it at all. Or not hypocritical, but they say there's nothing cool about it. There's nothing interesting. It adds, you know, there's nothing actually intrinsically interesting or cool about it. And I think that's just not true. But
that's like the mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving or whatever strategy of like just being completely out of touch and dishonest about like your advertising or like the message, like not acknowledging, just like like just being like very one-sided and not acknowledging that like there is a certain amount of temptation and draw to, like, you know, cigarettes or drugs or alcohol. Like all those things are popular and
Abstinence
powerful body.
only.
Yeah, exactly. It's the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
type
exactly.
of. It's the same attitude. I think it's not going to be effective. It's just, it isn't.
It's like trying to pretend that it's not cool because if you admit it that it's cool, then you have no argument or something. Like it's just like you can't have any sort of nuanced view on it and admit that it's cool or yeah, like the abstinence only, like sex bad, sex unnatural, sex awful, like only sustain until or abstain until you're married. Yeah, I think that's a great point, or a great example of that type of attitude, because can't possibly admit that sex is fun, because then it's like it's treating people like they're stupid essentially.
Yeah, exactly. It's you're a child, a dumb child, and we need to make decisions for you. We have to hide information from you and lie to you because otherwise you're going to make the wrong choices. And I think that's a very, very bad call.
Man, I'm thinking of like cool smoking scenes and anything in like early German Empire, like Prussians with like their pointed helmets and like the generals just sitting around in a big ornate ballroom just puffing on cigars. It's like just such a like powerful image.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it wouldn't be the same if they weren't puffing on cigars. Like it's such a like we're on top of the world and we know it. Kind of like
that's everyone's go-to cool smoker is the Prussian general.
Yeah.
Very relatable.
Well, I'm just not sure why I have it as like one of the strongest images of smoking in my brain, but it's so like it just perfectly sums it up for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I would definitely smoke if it wasn't like
Horrible for you.
It didn't have all the
Expensive.
downside. Like,
Yeah.
if it wasn't bad for you and it didn't.
If it was like coffee.
make you smell. Yeah, like if it was like coffee, although I wouldn't really consider coffee cool, but yeah, like if it had the same cost benefit analysis as coffee, I would smoke like a chimney.
Yeah,
exactly.
that would be just the dream. Someone's just got to figure out a way to improve human lungs so they can handle particulates.
Just go bionic.
Yeah, this is true. Just who needs lungs anyway?
Exactly. COVID has revealed their weakness and fragility. Just
Time to move on to the next stage.
get the next stage of human evolution. Bionic lungs.
I'm looking forward to it.
Elon Musk will have it in no time. Once he gets the chip in your brain, like it'll be able to tell when your lungs are supposed to be moving and tell the bionic lungs to do the same.
I'm excited for the Elon Musk overlord rule.
Well, you got to move to Mars for him to be the legal overlord.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he's added nearly a Toyota since we last talked about him.
That's true.
The dream.
What is it?
A
at
Civic
now?
or a Corolla or a Sienna?
Yeah, 40,000 market cap. Big moves, big market moves. Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. Oh, that's all I had for that one, unless you guys got some more there.
Yeah, I think.
I think that's pretty good.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Alright, guys. Call it a day.
Yep.
Thanks for listening. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.